Hey, we're back today to talk about Chapter Extension 7, all about mobile systems. Now, this is probably one of the most exciting new developments in information systems that has really come about in the last 10 years. And you know what? A lot of it, we're used to using a lot of this technology now, and you probably know, the smartphone, the tablets, they're all around us, and we're all immersed with this, at least on a personal basis. But what does that mean for business? And that's kind of what we want to focus on, not only how awesome this technology is, which honestly it is freaking awesome. Particularly when you think about the smartphone, the one I'm holding right here in my hand. This has the same processing power as a supercomputer did 30 years ago. Now, just stop and think about that for a little bit here. 30 years ago. Now, that was after I was born. I'm over 30 years old. And the computers that they had back then, now I have the power of the most powerful computer 30 years ago, now sitting in the palm of my hand. And I can do so much incredible stuff with this. Like look up cat videos and paste stuff on Facebook about, my hike this weekend. There's when you look at it from that perspective, you're kind of like, well, what the heck are we all doing here? But we all have that power in our hand to paste cat videos online. But no, so what the question is, though, what does that mean for business? But in part two, consider that, this is the technology we have in our hand now, where we're going to be in another 30 years, because we're just barely getting started. If this is the power we have now, and 30 years from now, the current supercomputers will be in the palm of our hand. I mean, think about that now. The current supercomputers now are doing massive data calculations for calculating weather across the globe in minute details and doing advanced scientific research. Yeah, we'll have that capability in our hand in about 30 years. I mean, that's just freaking amazing to think about. All right, so here's what we're going to look at in this little discussion. What are mobile systems? And then that's kind of basic, but you'll see that if we keep a broad enough definition of it, there is a lot of potential for where this might go. Two, why are mobile systems important? Now, some of it's pretty obvious, and some of it's not so obvious. So we really need to dig into that. What is the obvious parts and what isn't the obvious parts? All right, how do native and browser-based mobile applications compare? And if you don't know what the heck I'm talking about there, we'll try to clear that up a smidge. We'll talk about what characterizes quality mobile user experiences. And there might be a bit of subjectiveness into that definition, but we'll try to hammer in on what typical things are in common across the board. And lastly, what are the challenges of the personal mobile devices at work? Because that is kind of where the future is going. So the question is, what does that mean? So let's start with mobile systems. Now, obviously, we can talk about smartphones. People know exactly what you're talking about. When I mention a smartphone or a tablet, I'm going to assume that all of you are very familiar with those different terms. But it can be a bit broader than that. So the major elements in a mobile system, first you have to consider that the users are usually in motion. And by in motion, what this basically means is you take the device with you. In other words, they're mobile devices. Now, you could make the argument that a laptop is a mobile device, and in a sense it is. But you don't usually work on a laptop when you're walking, right? Usually you have to sit down to a desk in order to make it functional. Tablets and smartphones, you don't necessarily need to do that. Now, a lot of people use their tablets. They are sitting when they use them. But you could stand and walk while you're typing on your tablet, and as long as you're careful how you hold it, it won't fall, and you'll be able to continue to work. Or maybe you're in your car working, And so, but the idea is that the user's in motion. This is in particular important when you consider where mobile is going next. Almost all of them now have wireless connectivity. It's very, very rare you'll find a mobile device without wireless connectivity. And it just makes them so much more useful. If you have to stop and plug it in, you'll lose the mobility and the power of a mobile device. Now, also, a lot of these mobile devices are built in order to keep them smaller in size. They don't have quite as much storage or capabilities, and so they put a lot of more resources on the cloud. So we talked about cloud computing in our last discussion. So what we find in mobile devices, a lot of them have cloud-based resources. So yes, we can have the same power of a supercomputer in our hand, a supercomputer from 30 years ago, but it's better than that, because not only do we have that capability, but we also have the capability of reaching all these other resources that are out there very, very easily. So what are the key characteristics of a mobile device? Well, it has to be some sort of computing device. In other words, there has to be some sort of computer in it. They also tend to be small, lightweight, power conserving, and capable of wireless access. And that's it. So they're very generic definitions of a mobile device. Computing has to have some sort of computing device, small, lightweight, power conserving. So in other words, doesn't use a lot of power, and capable of wireless access. So what makes up the elements of a mobile information system? Well, remember, if you're talking about an information system, you have to have the 5 components. You have hardware, software, data, procedures, and people, right? So we have the users who are in motion. That's kind of their procedures, in motion, doing something. The hardware is the actual physical device. There's lots of softwares and applications available on it. The data can either be stored on there, but they also have a lot of wireless connectivity. Now, the wireless connectivity is supported by the hardware and software, and resources on the cloud, which is a lot of software already out there on the internet available to a mobile device. And so it kind of looks a little bit like this, a little diagram here. So you have various different mobile devices connecting to all these different resources, and allows them to have a lot of power in your fingertips. And now this is, because of this, we've seen the explosion in the use of smartphones and tablets. In fact, it isn't quite, right now smartphones have far outstripped sales of PCs. Tablets are on pace to outsell PCs in just a few years. In fact, the computer I'm working with right now, it's kind of a in-between device. It's actually a Lenovo Helix, which is probably would be classified as a tablet. Classified as a laptop. However, the screen detaches and becomes a tablet. It's also built with a really some pretty hefty-duty processing capabilities, such that I don't have a desktop computer at my office anymore. I use the Lenovo Helix for everything, including some stats that I do, which tend to be very process-intensive. So I'm using some very process-intensive programs on essentially a laptop/tablet. Now, how would this be classified? Well, that's a tough call, but I would put it at somewhere. I think I would call it a laptop that can transition into a tablet. So yeah, I don't know how this would fit into this category, but I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Devices that connect up with each other or sync with each other, or some way, you come back to your home base. Now that home base is going to continue to shrink, to the point where you're going to want to be able to walk into a room and have whatever device in your pocket sync with whatever devices are around you. Now that's kind of the ideal, and someday we'll get there. We're not there yet. But that is kind of the long term where we're going with this. So why are mobile systems so important? We see the growth of these. But why? Well, first, let's look at the impact of mobile systems growth. So number one, well, we've seen many more devices being sold. with compact interfaces and new technology for active users, which give a lot of scaling capabilities for applications. Got a great deal more data that's being generated, but is it really more information? Well, we'll talk about that. But you also notice that they're a lot smaller in their interface. So you don't have to work with these big, huge screens like you do on a desktop. Now you have these little small screens. So data that's being displayed has to be displayed in a certain way that's very limiting in some sense. But they also tend to be always on and always at work. You know, for me, I bring my smartphone, I set it on the desk next to me, and every now and then I would get texts from my wife or from friends, and I can text back. But there's a problem with that as well, because sometimes that can distract me from the work I need to get done. You know, I could be really engrossed in my work, and when I get a text from my wife, I want to check it. But then I lose concentration on what I'm working on. So it's not always a good thing to have those smartphones at your fingertips. But it does give the ability of people to thrive in a dynamic environment. What's going on in the industry? Well, we'll see that the PCs are less important. I mean, there's still, as you saw, there's still growth in the number of PCs being sold. That hasn't stopped. But smartphones and tablets are outpacing the sales, the growth in PC sales by a large margin. In fact, what we're finding is a lot of third world countries, so people who can barely afford, you know, even electricity, are more likely to buy a smartphone. And this seems rather counterintuitive. They can barely afford electricity, but they're going out and buying smartphones. Now, they might only spend, you know, $100 on this smartphone, and they're going to have a hard time trying to power it. But they realize that all the capabilities built into these smartphones are so freaking phenomenal that it's actually to their own benefit. Like, they see the value in these smartphones as astronomical. And so, yes, people, extremely poor people, you know, I'm not talking about the poor that you find here in the U.S. I'm talking about the poor people in these third world countries who maybe only have, you know, $3,000 that they make in a year, and they'll spend $100 of it on a smartphone because it's that important to them and their lives. But it allows them to have this connection to the rest of the world and to learn with having this power of a supercomputer in their hands. Well, a supercomputer from 30 years ago, but still, you get the point. All right, other things going on in industry changes. Well, we also see there's with new technologies, in particular HTML, which is a web development language, HTML5, and CSS, which is a way of styling your web pages, also increase the capability of thin clients. And we'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. Now, one problem that they're realizing in the industry is that you're starting to lose a lot of control. When businesses created their own or brought in their own desktops, you know, they bought the desktops for people to work on. They had complete control over those desktops. Well, now people are coming in and walking in with their smartphones, and their smartphone syncs with their email, and so they're downloading all their email to their smartphone. And then they walk away from their office with all that information on their smartphone. The same might be said for tablets. So what does that mean for a lot of businesses? You're losing control of the technology. That might be a good thing or a bad thing. It depends on how you approach it. But another thing a lot of businesses have to deal with is the personal mobile devices at work. And what kind of policy are you going to have about that, and how are you going to enforce it? I mean, can you really enforce people not bringing a smartphone into their office or having them turn it off? Good luck with that. And it might come to a point where industry sees that they're going to want more part-time employees and independent contractors, in which case these people will bring their own technology with them. Particularly with all the increasing laws with how you deal with your current employees, it may be advantageous to have more independent contractors to make your paperwork simpler. Career opportunities, well, they're actually quite phenomenal right now in the mobile market. Not just in like mobile device, and I'm not even talking about the building the mobile devices, because most of you are probably business students. But the jobs for mobile devices in sales and marketing and support are growing, and that's not just for the hardware, but it's also on the software side for developing needed requirements for new mobile software, being able to develop perhaps a new website that can be shown on mobile devices. There's also increases with the amount of data being gathered. So someone needs to be able to report and analyze that and design effective mobile reports. There's innovative use of just-in-time data. For example, you can now keep better track of, and then we might talk about this here in a minute. Suppose someone has a smartphone that is linked to your company app, but also passes along your geolocation. In other words, your geographic location. And you walk into their store. Well, you might get an advertisement sent straight to your smartphone because you walked into their store, because they can detect that you walked in there. Now that's just-in-time data, and that adds an incredibly different way of looking at it, of business, when you can start doing stuff like that. But there's need for adjusting business processes that gives another premium to non-routine problem solvers. In other words, there's going to be changes going on in industry because of these mobile devices. And the question is, what are you going to do to help the business succeed with these changes? We'll also see, I think there's a pattern that will continue to develop, but more and more independent contractors will work where and when they want, and it could create an entirely different type of company where it's less and less massive and more independent people working together in collaborative efforts. So why are mobile systems so important? Well, because we're seeing this massive change going on in all the different arenas, and it's going to have a massive impact on business. Now, some of this might seem kind of trivial, but the truth of the matter, because a lot of this people are seeing more on the user experience side. You buy this for your personal reasons. You use your Facebook, you use email, you might search on your smart device when you're out with your friends. You might have a calendar that gives you notifications, or an alarm clock, which is a lot of fun little bitty things. But as businesses continue to adopt more and innovate around these mobile systems, I think we're going to see a lot more growth in this capability of using the mobile devices in business for honestly, I think we really haven't even grasped the potential change in a lot of this industry. So a lot of this stuff might seem trivial, and I think that is in part because a lot of businesses are having a hard time wrapping their heads around how can we use this change in technology within our business to make our business stronger. And so there's a lot of opportunity here for people like yourselves who are very familiar with the technology and grew up with this technology to go in and have an impact on business. All right, now there's an important differentiation here that I want to bring out. And some of you might be familiar with this, or at least the ideas behind it. So a lot of you, we have, or usually called, when you go to an app store, like Apple's store or the Microsoft store or the Google Android store, you download an app, right? An app just means an application. It's short for application. Well, that's a native mobile application that you're downloading to the smartphone, and you basically install it. It's no different than installing software on a desktop computer. Right? It's basically the same thing. But you don't have to do that. There's also something called a thin client mobile applications, and these are actually built like web pages. All right? They're web pages with sophisticated capabilities built into it. So why is that differentiation important? Well, because if you're working with mobile devices, you don't have to necessarily build everything as this little downloadable piece of software. You could create these thin client mobile applications. So if they have a browser on their smartphone, which all of them do, you can easily roll out these applications to people. All you have to do is, know the location of your website, and they can go there. So what's the difference? Well, basically, there's different languages that are being used, which probably most of you don't care about. And there's different people that will be doing the development. And this you might start caring about, especially if you're someone who has even a little bit of technical skills. It is very easy for you to go and develop your own thin client mobile applications. Those capabilities are becoming easier and easier. And so the skill level requirement for the thin client mobile apps can be pretty low. Now, if you're doing something pretty sophisticated, you'll need a high level of skill, but people without a whole lot of skill can easily start putting stuff together. And that includes the difficulty to create mobile apps. Native mobile apps are hard, very, very difficult. Thin clients can be easy to do. And so even people in computer science, information systems, graphic design, but even people that might have a background in marketing but have learned how to develop a website, so they took a class in web development, can do quite well with these. The user experience, though, so the question is, should you? Now the next question is not so much, yes, they're different, and we see that you might think, though, with the thin clients, the way to go, right? Well, the thing is, with the user experience, you tend to get a much richer user experience with the native mobile app versus the thin client. Possible ways, things you can do. Well, the fact of the matter is the native mobile app tends to be far more powerful, so you can do almost anything, and people are willing to pay for it because they tend to be pretty powerful. The thin client has some limits that prohibit very sophisticated applications. Now, there are some dependencies, such as if you're building a mobile app, it has to be on a specific platform, like a specific operating system. Let me be more specific there, versus a browser and a thin client. All right, costs tends to be much more costly to develop a native mobile application. However, it's not that obscenely high. They still tend to be smaller than a lot of software that you put on a desktop. Difficult to work by highly unpaid employees. Multiple versions often required because, let's face it, you got iOS, Android, Windows, and even on Android you have multiple versions. Windows, you have a couple different versions. I'm not sure about iOS, but you might have different versions there. Whereas within the thin client, it tends to be a lot easier because you control the web server. You don't control the browser per se, but you don't need a whole lot of different versions because usually browsers interpret things pretty similar. Application distribution. Yeah, obviously, we talked about the different stores like the Apple Store. But you get the idea. So when we're talking mobile devices and what software we put on there, there's different ways about going about doing this. There's your apps. When people usually say the words apps, they're talking about the native mobile application. However, you can also create websites that can do sometimes just as much as those apps can. But even that, with the right development skills, you can do almost the same stuff and still make it available on for these mobile devices. So which is better? Well, that depends on both your strategy and your goals, the application requirements. So, particularly if you need access to something specific that's on the phone. So, for example, the thin client mobile apps, these web pages, tend to not have the capabilities of accessing your GPS system. So the websites usually can't. They might have some limited idea of where you're located, but they're not as precise as versus the app scan. Your budget, your schedule, tolerance for managing technical projects, need for application revenue, because the website usually isn't going to make as much. The thin client applications are cheaper to develop and maintain. And although the book doesn't talk about this, the thin client applications also tend to be slower and less feature-rich. And the thin clients may lack that wow factor that apps can sometimes give you, because it seems a little more special and a little bit more dynamic, so it can catch people's attention. All right. So that's kind of the basic differences between these. And these are things that especially mobile developers are really interested in. But even as business people, this is important for you to understand the difference so that when you are talking to your IT people, and this is important to understand. So for example, there's a mobile app for ECU. I installed it on my smartphone, and I didn't use it at all. Why was that? Well, because it really didn't meet my needs. So whoever developed this app for ECU did not include features that, at least for myself, I found very useful. So I end up always going to the website whenever I need something. Right? So that was an app. This is the case where, now I'm sure they had very quality people, and they might even had some sort of process to help them develop this. And I don't want to badmouth the IT people, because they're great people. But this app that they developed really did not solve my problems, right? And so this is something, as a user, is very meaningful to me, right? Because I wasn't satisfied with what they came up with. Now, I'm not even sure what I would want for ECU to develop for an application if they were to. But this is, so think about it yourself, though. What would make your interaction with ECU better if you had, what type of mobile app would make your interaction better, right? And that's what you can then make recommendations or say, especially if you're employed with this company, and say, all right, this is how I use my phone. This is what would make my job 10 times easier, as if when I'm walking around, I can click, click, click on my phone and get what I want. Now, one thing I could easily see them doing, or should be able to do, is have a much more sophisticated map as an app. One that's very easy for me to type in the name or even say the name and have it voice translated into a name. Not just the names of buildings, but where certain rooms are within buildings. Sometimes I'll walk into a building, especially like I went over to Rivers, and there's two different parts to Rivers, and someone said, "Oh, we're meeting in room 205," and I show up at 205, and it's a closet. And I'm like, I don't think we're meeting here, but it was on their new edition, not their old building, and it was that. That's the type of thing that can be very, very useful. All right, so let's go on. What characterizes quality mobile user experience? All right, so here's 5 things that the book talks about. Number 1, feature, content, and support direct interaction. So you have to have something that is useful, some content that is something that users want, and supports an interaction with them. Right? So they're usually not using a mobile device to do lots of reading. So the content, whatever content you have, don't assume that they're going to be reading 3 pages or 10 pages worth of content on a smartphone. Maybe on a tablet. but most likely not. All right, you want to use context-sensitive Chrome when needed. Now, when we say Chrome, we're not talking about the browser made by Google. Okay. What we're talking about, this Chrome, is everything in an interface. You know, think about if you put Chrome on a car, right? It's the shiny stuff, the fancy stuff. And so when they say Chrome, what they're talking about is the interface that makes things a little bit cooler looking, right? However, you don't necessarily know what type of device they're using. It could be a large tablet, a small tablet, a smartphone. You don't know their internet connectivity, so maybe they're in a place where there's very slow internet connectivity, or maybe they're getting very fast. So you want to adjust the interface such that it doesn't, it's responsive, so they can get the most interaction that they can and the most cool, shiny stuff when they can. But in other cases, you want to make sure it's functional and that it works, and that the shiny stuff doesn't make it go too slow. So this means that Chrome pops up only when needed, and the device needs to figure out when the user may need it. All right. So this also includes providing animation and lively behavior. Right? And this is just becoming an expectation that people have of devices. That the better it can animate and respond to what you're doing, the better. It needs to be able to scale and share your information. So scale how the stuff is being displayed and have the capabilities to share this very easily. People love to be able to share on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever they want to put it, they want to have access to it and be able to give it and share that with other people. And then they also want to have access to the cloud. And so a lot of new apps have that built into them. Right? Now, we could probably talk about a lot more on the mobile experience. In fact, what I would ask you to do now is to briefly stop and jot down a few things about applications, smartphone apps that you have used that had a really bad user experience, or that you really detested using. Write down the reasons why and see how they match up with these 5. Think about what it was missing and what they could have done differently to make it better. Because again, when you're out in the business world, you're going to have to work with your IT people to help develop exactly that user experience that you want. So if you can better describe to them what you need and what works well based on your own experiences, the more likely you're going to get it. But you also have to keep in mind that there's also going to be a lot of other people out there with the same problems, but perhaps using different devices. Because again, a lot of times people are bringing different devices to work. In fact, that is a huge challenge. And that brings us to question 5. What are the challenges of personal mobile devices at work? And the BYOD, bring your own device. That's what BYOD stands for. Bring your own device to work. So businesses are considering this, and there's a lot of good things about it, and there's a lot of things that are kind of scary. But a lot of people want to do it, and so like I keep repeating, I have my smartphone here with me at work. Now, how much work do I actually do with my smartphone? Pretty limited, but I do check my email occasionally on it. I do occasionally go to websites on it, but most of the time I'm sitting at a laptop that is provided for me. Well, when can businesses start asking their employees to bring their own devices to work? So what advantages to the business is there? Well, one, it saves your company money because they're bringing their own device, and most of people are having these own devices now. Now it's becoming far more ubiquitous to have computing devices. Greater employee satisfaction because they bring the device that makes them happiest. reduces the need for training, generally has higher productivity, reduced support costs, or can have reduced support costs. Not always. And so what are some of the disadvantages? Well, one is the fact that since you lose control, and that's number two, loss of control over the device, the software sometimes, and even the data, you can end up having data loss or damage, and there's nothing you can really do about it. You might run into some compatibility problems if people are bringing different devices that don't talk well with each other. Now, I'm thinking of some of the different ecosystems like the Apple products versus the Android products versus the Windows products. Some of their software might be compatible, some of it may not be. You also increase some of the security issues, particularly risk of viruses and infections, because you don't have the control over the devices themselves. People might inadvertently bring stuff in, not knowing it, and then infect the rest of the network. Now, you can have reduced support costs, but it can also backfire and have greater support costs in that now you have these people with all these different devices, and they may need help with those devices. So depending on how technically savvy these people are that are bringing their devices, your support costs could go up drastically because you have a lot of different types of devices, so you need more people with specializations in different kinds of devices. And so, like, for example, and I keep yelling at my wife about this, but she likes to buy her mom this new technology, so she bought her mom an iPad and a Kindle and an iPhone, and they bought her a computer. And, well, that's great that she has all these capabilities. The problem is I am the one that ends up having to support it. And I don't even own my own iPad. So trying to support somebody else's iPad is very, it takes a lot more of my time and effort to figure out what's going on and to fix it. In fact, just this past weekend, I was over at her house trying to learn how to work with a Wii. She has a Wii, the WII, the Nintendo gaming system. I was trying to figure out if there was a way I could get a Netflix channel on her Wii so that way she could watch Netflix from it. I had no clue what I was looking at. And so, I spent probably 20, 30 minutes trying to learn how the Wii worked, how to connect it to the internet. And now I never did end up finding out, even if they have a Netflix channel, and much less putting it on there. But that's where the greater support costs can actually come in. So even though it may sound really cool to have this to begin with, support costs can go up, especially if people are not very technically savvy. Other considerations for mobile computing. Well, one is there's actually a reduced amount of focus you can have when working on a mobile device. In particular, we have a smaller stimulus area. The screens are small. Now, even if you're working with a tablet, they're smaller than you would get at a desktop. Now, you might think, that's not a big deal. I don't mind. But it can become a problem when you're trying to focus, especially like if you're trying to read. And if it's a smaller area, like a small smartphone, it's very difficult to read, which can reduce your ability to focus on what you're doing. It also can be cumbersome input, and how many times have we seen people mistype things on their phones, right? And often leads to multitasking, which actually is a bad thing when it comes to focus. Now, I've seen students doing this in class, where they're working on an assignment and then they get a text and they immediately look at their phone. What they don't realize what they're doing when they do that is that they've just destroyed probably 5 minutes of time spending 10 seconds looking at their screen because they lose their focus on what they're working on. In fact, there's research to back that up, that the usage of these devices can actually make it much more difficult to focus and learn and to get work done. So, what can you do about that? Well, number one is, even though they're great to have, it's better to put them away while you're trying to get some work done. Other considerations: more data, more and more and more data. In fact, we're doubling the amount of data we're storing every 2 years in the world. Yeah, doubling it every 2 years. That's how much more data there is, okay? So, but what's nice, though, is that, you get everything in one place. You get a little smartphone that can access more and more and more data. So even though we're creating this data, we're actually able to get a hold of it. Does that mean we can process it? That depends. But we still have this one device where we can get. In fact, now it's to the point where, I'm out with friends, we have a question. I used to be like, I wish I knew this. Now I can look it up. Or what's that actor that played in that movie? I can look it up. We're getting a lot more into location data. In fact, in this I mentioned earlier, something called geofencing. Well, if you think about what a fence is, right? It's a little enclosed area. And it's the fact where you can walk into a store if you have a certain smartphone that's turned on and has access to the app might recognize that you're now within this certain parameter of the store. It might send you a coupon. So now that you've gotten within this fenced-in area, they can now send you data. But it also brings up questions about location privacy. So when can you turn that on and off? And will people always know where you're at? So that's like the cell phone companies. Are they always going to know where you're at? Every time your phone connects to the network? Now, there's a whole lot of questions we get into the ethics of that, but right now, just keep in mind that this is an unknown right now of how best to deal with this, and it's something that you all are going to have to deal with as you go out into the workforce. All right, there's also a great risk of loss or exposure. Now, think about what happens to you if your phone breaks or lost. How many of you would freak out if you lost your phone? Because it's got so much of your life right there in your fingertips. It would really suck, and most of us would not like it. We'll also see that a lot of security on these smartphones are actually kind of low. They could be easily hacked, especially if it got stolen. Someone can easily turn it on, plug it in, figure out all your personal information. So all that personal information you keep on your phone, people can get access to it. And a lot of people, once they're into their phone, there's no more security. So they might be storing information on all these different apps in the cloud. But if the phone is found by somebody else and hacked into, now they have access to everything that you've stored in the cloud. Pictures, data, everything, man. So there is a lot of concern in this area as well. And let's face it, people do use smartphones to do stupid things. And so that is a danger. What's next? Well, mobile devices, generally right now we're focusing just on the smartphone and tablet, but that's changing in multiple different ways. And some of these already exist, like the Google Glass, a computing device that you wear, or a smartwatch, right? So the new smartwatches are just starting to come out. Some of them their basic capabilities just to sync with your phone. But, it makes it easier so you don't have to pull the phone out of your pocket. And I could certainly see using that like when I'm walking along or driving in my car and someone calls me or sends me a message and I don't want to check it because, it's in my pocket. It's a pain in the butt to try to get it out. They even came up with technology that, as you can see, the contact lens in the middle of the page. Basically, you can put technology into the contact lens so that way you're actually wearing, I believe you can put a camera in there so that I can actually record or take pictures of what you're looking at. Now, I don't know exactly all the details of how that works, but they are working on this technology to do some really incredible things. And the arm at the bottom. Now, this might freak a lot of people out, But the capabilities of actually implanting devices, or maybe even putting skin grafts, or not even skin grafts, but maybe it's a tattoo you can put on your body to help track different information. So where could something like this come in handy? Well, I certainly see it's a place for, like in the military, you put these on your soldiers. And then when they go out in the field, you can keep tabs on how they're doing. Are they stressed out? Are they, are they alive? Which is sad to think about, but yeah. But you can, by keeping these devices on them, you can see how they're doing. Now, imagine you do one of these little devices. Maybe if you're an athlete and like to train, maybe one of these little devices that you can tattoo onto your arm can help keep better tabs of your biometrics and help keep you at your peak performance and train better, right? So right now, if you look over on the bottom left, these wristbands are now the new training devices of our day. But we can get more sophisticated to the point where we're going to be able to, like I said, have athletes train to their optimal. Well, even, casual athletes might start doing that so that they can train more effectively once they get out there and have the best results from their workouts by keeping tabs of maybe their heartbeat and their, the rate they're perspiring, and keep track of their blood pressure and keep track of all these different aspects, or how long you've been working out. You can put that all together into these devices that allow then communicate with each other and allow you to live, hopefully, a much better life. And perhaps these too will translate into the business environment, and that now we can, maybe these tattooed devices can help with security. Or they might, but again, maybe they'll hurt security. So if you have a wearable contact lens and you can take pictures of wherever you're at, whatever your eyes can see, what does that mean for security? Oh, this is a crazy time we're living in, and there's just going to be so much things that are changing. The big questions we need to start asking ourselves is how can we use these to create value for our company, for ourselves, for our society, so that we can live a much better and happier life. And still keep an eye out and realize that not everyone out there is going to be good, but if we approach it with a very proactive stance, which is we want these devices to create the most good that they can. And yes, we'll keep an eye out for the bad, but we're not going to let the bad stop us from achieving the great things that we can achieve. I think now we're looking at a world where things are going to be, changing quite drastically, and I'm actually honestly looking forward to it. So at any rate, let's talk about what we did today. So the active review. What are mobile systems? Well, remember, it has to be a user in motion with some mobile device connecting wirelessly and often through the cloud. And these are extremely important systems for how we interact with the world and with technology, and are changing things in quite drastic ways. And that's one reason why we're seeing this explosive growth in mobile systems, is because everybody sees the same potential and wants to have that value added to their life and to the world around them. Now, there is some differences in how you create these mobile systems and interact with these mobile systems, particularly the difference between native apps versus the browser-based mobile applications. But what stays the same is the quality of a mobile user experience. And particularly what we want is something that can work with us no matter what device we're looking at and working and interacting with. So particularly, we want it to be scalable. We want it to be able to, adjust to the device we're using and the context in which we're using it. So we get the most value out of it, yet still enjoy the greatest experience we can. And what are some of those challenges of the personal mobile devices at work? Because we are going to continue seeing these more and more in the workplace. And maybe that we're not going to want to allow our employees to bring in every single mobile device that they have, but the fact of the matter is they're going to be bringing in more and more and more. So the question is then, how does a business work with these different mobile devices so that it can achieve as much value as possible, along with employees achieve as much possible value, and hopefully it'll be a symbiosis type of relationship with the technologies. And that's a big unknown question right now, is how best to go about doing that, and one that you're going to have to work with as you go out into the workforce. And you're going to have to deal with this both as a user, but also some of you, and as you go into management and deal with other people with these devices. Well, I hope you enjoyed this discussion of mobile systems, and we'll meet up next time.